When talking about international games, you always hear about how the Japanese versions are better or how the US versions took some features out. But is that always the case? Well, let's take a look. What's going on, guys? It's Podrez coming at you with another video. Alright, we're going to be talking about an international game that was better in the US. Interesting. Alright, so if you've seen a few of my videos and you like what I do, hit that subscribe button right there. Honestly, we're getting pretty close to 10,000 subscribers. Only you can help me get there. And we got about 150 members in the Discord server. We're doing pretty good. If you want to join it, just go to discord.podrez.net or just click on the link in the description. I mean, we got Feral Inferno in there finally, so I'm pretty happy about that. I didn't mean to shout you out, dude. Anyway, we're not going to waste any more time. Let's get right to the video. So, it's common to see the US versions of games get changed from the Japanese ones. A lot of Konami games, for example, were downgraded when they were brought over to the States because of Nintendo of America's policies. The Japanese version of Contra had better graphics and more polish, but when the game was released in the US, Konami had to downgrade it because Nintendo of America didn't allow third-party mappers. But does Japan always get the big end of the stick? In 1990, Taito published Power Blazer on the Famicom. It's a pretty basic platformer, but it has some unique features. You can do the stages in any order, which is cool. You play as this chubby-looking kid who throws boomerangs. The stages are all very linear. There's a few alternate paths, but for the most part, you just walk to the right and you'll eventually find the boss. The game is extremely hard, but for the wrong reasons. For starters, the controls are awful. Your jump height is absolutely pathetic. You can only throw your boomerang directly in front of you, not above, below, or diagonally. What happened? Your character must be really out of shape. Some enemies are much harder to kill because of the controls. The Beehive boss, for example, is impossible. They all attack you from above. You literally have no way to defend yourself because you can only throw straight ahead. For some reason, your character doesn't want to grab onto ladders either. I have to try 2 or 3 times before I get it, and I usually take unnecessary damage in the process. You start off with a very short attack range, and you have to be really close to the enemies to hit them. There's upgrades that increase your health, your range, and your power output, but the game very rarely gives you them. And when you die, you lose all your upgrades and you have to start from scratch. It's very difficult to build up your character because of the lack of power-ups and the hard difficulty. You can tell they were going for a kid-friendly type of game. Your character looks very cartoony, and when you die, you fall to the bottom of the screen like Mario. I'm going to talk more about this later. They definitely had the right idea with this game. The platforming is fun, and the boomerang mechanics would be cool with some changes, but the controls are bad, and it's very difficult to build up your stats. The developers of Power Blazer, Natsume, most likely realized they made some mistakes with this title. So when they had the opportunity to bring this game over to the States, they didn't keep it as is. They would make some big changes to the US version. The first thing I noticed is the character you play as. It looks like the chubby kid finally hit the gym and dyed his hair. There's actually an in-game plot in this one too, but the most important change they made is in the controls. You can jump higher now, and you can actually throw your boomerangs in 8 different directions. The power-ups are also more frequent, so it's easier to build up your character. You can even throw more than 1 boomerang at a time, which is really nice. In the first game, you could only throw 1 at a time. You can also grab onto ladders much easier on the first try. These are honestly some really big improvements, so already we have a much better game. But we're not done, because they did make some other changes. The levels are not as linear as before. Now there's multiple paths you can take, and you can't enter the boss's room without finding the keycard first. The levels are also much larger than the Japanese version. I generally don't like exploration type games, but this one doesn't overdo it. It's still pretty easy to find where you're going, and at no point did I ever get lost. Another cool feature is the power suit. This gives you a better projectile and 3 extra hits. So because the controls are better, the power-ups are more frequent, and there's power suits, it's a much easier game than the Japanese version. But again, Power Blazer was difficult for the wrong reasons. And if you do think Power Blade is too easy, there's an expert mode as well, so they thought of everything. The game has a more serious tone than Power Blazer. Your character looks less cartoony, and when you die, you actually collapse onto the ground rather than falling like Mario. Some of the music has been changed to sound more serious too, such as when you die and when you complete a stage. Perhaps they thought a less kiddie theme would be better for a game like this, and I agree. A lot of assets from Power Blazer were reused in Power Blade, like the graphics and music. Some of the enemy sprites have been updated to match the new theme, but the graphics still look like the kid-friendly Japanese version. Perhaps they didn't have enough time to redo the graphics. The music in this game is also fantastic, but to be fair, most of the music came from Power Blazer. Even though this version is superior, there's one thing that's better about Power Blazer. In that game, you can drop from one screen to another and it's perfectly fine, it's not an automatic death. But in Power Blade, you absolutely must use the ladders to migrate from one screen to another. If you try falling to the next screen, you die. I'm not sure why they decided to do this. To me, that was a stupid change. But overall, they really got it right with Power Blade. They fixed all the problems with the first game. The controls are much better and the difficulty is more balanced. This is proof that the Japanese version of games are not always better. However, this isn't the end of the Power Blade series. A year later, we would get a follow-up that would make some very surprising changes. Alright, now we're going to be talking about the sequel. Keep in mind, there was never a Power Blazer 2, so this game was developed with a darker and more serious theme in mind, and what we get as a result is very interesting. Right away, we can see that the graphic style is more appropriate for a Power Blade title. The core gameplay is exactly the same as before. The controls are still excellent, and it's very easy to power up your character just like before. You now have a sliding ability which allows you to enter narrow passageways. It's actually a very welcomed mechanic, and it's implemented very nicely here. The game is much more linear than before. There's no longer any alternate routes, and you don't have to collect a keycard anymore. It's actually a lot more like Power Blazer, which I don't mind. The game has more terrain you have to deal with. For example, level 2 introduces water. Here, you're much slower, but you can jump higher, and if you have the power suit, you can swim. Level 3 introduces fans. They propel you upwards, but you need to get the timing right. These mechanics are a nice twist on the gameplay. The first game didn't have any of these, so I'm glad to see them here. They actually made a really big change to the power suits. In the first game, all it did was give you more life and a better projectile. But in this game, there's multiple different power suits you can unlock, and they each have different abilities like climbing walls, swimming, and flying. But the suits no longer give you extra hit points, and you can only use them temporarily. In the first game, there was literally no reason not to collect the power suit, but in this game, you want to use them sparingly so you're not wasting your energy meter. Power Blade 2 has some great effects that make it stand out. For one, there's a lot of vertical scrolling, which the first game didn't have. Secondly, there's a lot of moving background layers like the auto-scroller in level 1, the ceiling in the beginning of level 2, and the fire pit at the end of level 2. The game clearly uses the MMC3 mapper, or something very similar. The graphics are hit and miss for me. In the first game, you were outdoors quite a bit and it was more colorful. But in this game, you're always stuck inside some confined area, and a lot of rooms are just a black background. It's actually kind of depressing to look at. I feel like I'm in some underground cave where I have no contact with the outside world. I almost feel like I'm in jail or something. So because this isn't a ROM hack of a kid-friendly game, the developers were able to focus on making a title that was more accurate to the Power Blade universe. So I'm seeing a lot of great things here, but it's still not a perfect game. The auto-scrollers, for example, are super unnecessary. The screen moves way too slow, and you have no choice but to sit there and wait. I also don't like the checkpoint system in this game. There's one checkpoint on each stage and it's at the mini-boss, but if you die while fighting him, it doesn't count as a checkpoint. Come on, I made it to the room, you couldn't give me it? Overall, it seems like they did everything they could to make this a better game than Power Blade 1. Some of the split screen effects are really cool, and the extra features like vertical scrolling and the new power suit abilities are nice additions, but I still prefer the first game. I like the exploration aspect more, the graphics are better, and there's no annoying auto-scrollers. It's a really close call. I do like Power Blade 2, but the first one edges it out just a little bit. Normally, you would think the Japanese version of games would be better, but Power Blade proves that theory wrong. The first game, Power Blazer, was a decent start, but it was rough around the edges. The controls were awful, it was near impossible to get weapon upgrades, and the game was too difficult. But the developers learned from their mistakes and released Power Blade in the US. Here, the controls are much better, the weapon upgrades are more frequent, and the difficulty is more balanced. So we can see that, for once, the US got the bigger end of the stick. Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.